So Sarah, you've had a long career, a lot of editing. Tell us a little bit about when you started working as a photo editor and how you came to that and how you came to work as a photo editor, and then what path have you taken from there to the current position that you're in?
So I started out as a photographer, and all photographers were editing our own work, right? You go out, you do a shoot, you edit it down, you pick your favorite photos. So I think, all photographers are editors, in a sense. And I also was teaching a lot of workshops, photography workshops, and then you have students and then you're editing their work. And I, quickly realized how much easier it was to edit somebody else's work than my own work, which I think most photographers have experienced. And I really enjoyed doing those edits in class. I spent, and as a freelancer, freelance photographer, you're always kind of cobbling your everything together, whether some photographers do commercial work or something. But I was also working with my husband, who had a design and book packaging company, and I did some editing for them. And I just always really enjoyed it. And I kind of thought, as I gone in my career, I don't know, maybe someday I'll hang up the cameras and maybe I'll try editing more seriously. So a position opened up at the National Geographic magazine, an editing position. And they, in those days, those positions did not open up very often as senior photo editor. And I knew the director of that department at the time was Chris Johns. And he shortly after that became editor of the whole magazine. And I had worked with him as a photographer at a small newspaper in Kansas. And I felt like, well, I'm just going to apply. Yeah, I'm fine being a photographer, but you never know. And I thought, I had no, sort of published credentials as a photo editor. So I thought, if anybody might hire me, maybe it's the Geographic because they know me, and lo and behold, I got the job. And so I worked as a photo editor for about 8 years before becoming director of photography. And, and when I show the presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I just loved it. I actually felt I loved being a photo editor. I loved working with the photographers. I loved the stories and trying to figure out the coverage, because as a photo editor, you're doing more than just picking the photos. You're involved in the conceiving the whole project, the budgeting, doing the research, helping the photographer figure out what to photograph. And I just really loved it. And I actually had more confidence as a photo editor than I ever had as a photographer, right? I was one of those pretty insecure photographers, always feeling like, oh, this is my last job, and the imposter syndrome and the whole 9 yards, right? But I felt more confident and settled as a photo editor, and felt like I could really help people, help the photographers. So
tell us a bit more about your process, as it were, as a photo editor at National Geographic in that transition, because what you described there about being involved in all aspects of the project, I mean, it's a bit like being a project manager as well as kind of editing the outcome.
You're absolutely right, David. You are very much like a producer and project manager. The ideas, you're often assigned a story by usually the director of photography assigns the stories. Sometimes it could be your own idea, and the ideas might come in by a photographer, or it might come in by an editor or any staff at the Geographic, and you would get assigned the story, and then often without a photographer attached, or nobody's attached at first. Sometimes they are, if it's their idea. And then so you immediately start researching the topic. You start figuring out what is there to photograph and what is the story. And you have a whole team of people are attached to that project. So, you have the text editor, you have the maps and graphics people, you have the design people. So, there's a lot of conversation figuring it out. And then, you may probably, then you might start suggesting photographers for the project if the director does not already have somebody in mind, and then you have the conversation like who would be good to do this, and then get the photographer involved in the researching as well, and figuring out because you got to make a budget, and the budget will depend on well, we're going to one place, we're going to 3 countries, we're going to spend 4 weeks, we're going to spend 8 weeks, so you kind of make your plan, and then you make the budget, and then, and that's what you're going to pitch. And then the photo editor, then the whole team will pitch the whole concept and the idea to the editor of the magazine and the executive team. And you just pitch here's what we want to do, here's where we want to go, here's what the maps and graphics people, here's the online version, here's where we want to make video, all the bells and whistles, and then see if you get it approved. Yeah. The editor may say, well, I kind of like that, but I'd rather do some of this and less of that, and then you adjust.
Yeah. Would you describe National Geographic as a typical example of an institution in the media industry, or an atypical example, given the scale of what you've talked about there?
I think it's probably fairly atypical, although I would say the New York Times does some really big projects with a lot of time and funding behind them. I think, Time Magazine also, but I think they're more, they're not the daily business of those publications. But when they do them, they're incredible. They do amazing. And where the Geographic, it's more, every issue. There's big stories, and that take, a year, can be over the course of photographing it and building it till publication. So I do think it's more the exception in the industry. They do a lot more shorter assignments, more than they used to because of online. Those assignments are always less, they're not as big.
I mean, it's probably fair to say that most people have a fairly negative view of the state of the media industry in terms of declining resources, fewer staff positions, etc. What's your perspective? How do you kind of characterize the current state of the field?
I mean, I think what you're saying is there is that all of that is true, and a challenge. I think over my years at the Geographic, the budget was being cut every year, and we had to adjust, and we had to figure it out. So back in the good old bad old days, I worked on stories that were 20 weeks, as a photographer, for 4 months on one story. Well, that's just hardly ever happening anymore, right? That doesn't, a big story would be 8 weeks, now. So, but I also think, so on the one hand, but then on the other hand, more and more people want to be part of this. More and more photographers. They're just so many wonderful, amazing photographers coming up, and they're finding a way. They're finding a way to do their work and get grants. There's more grants than ever out there for photographers. There's tons of grants. There's lots of other kind of support that's not just the big media companies anymore. And there's so many, like when I, some of the books I'm working on, there's a lot of, self-publishing going on, Kickstarter. People, as one thing has shrunk, other things have grown. to help support photographers and help them find a way. I mean, there's great organizations like Seven and Noor and all the different photo agencies, you know, that are supporting photographers and finding ways to get their work out there. So as gloomy as the one thing can seem, I think I see so much amazing work being made and published and supported by all kinds of different, you know, organizations. Like just today, I think the Leica Oscar Barnack Award awards were announced, the shortlist, you know, and I was looking at those this morning. I was like, damn, you know, I mean, really nice work, you know, so it's still happening.
Yeah.
There's still room, I think.
I mean, one of the other things that's going on in the field too, of course, are something of a reckoning, or maybe there should be a reckoning around some of the identity questions, diversity questions in the wake of Me Too scandals and so on. What do you think the state of play is with those issues? And what do you think the role of editors is in terms of handling those issues and taking a lead on those issues?
I think that's a really good question. And you could do a whole session just on that, right? We could talk a lot about it, but I think it's, well, definitely, you know, maybe since when I started, which was decades ago, you know, I mean, and you know, I'm ashamed to even say it, we didn't even think about it. I mean, it was not on our radar hardly, you know, like, you know, what? But now, you know, it's on all of our radar. It's all, we're all thinking about it. And I think, most of the media companies for sure, I think everybody's thinking about it and addressing it. Like while I was still there as, you know, the director of photography, you know, we talked about it a lot and we looked on how to increase the diversity and what programs we had a second assistant program for, you know, people of color and different, you know, ethnic and gender to work as assistant that was funded by the society, you know, to for people to work as assistants, especially in some of the fields like science and natural history, where it's very, you know, one color, one gender, you know, photographers. So I think everybody is working really hard. So I think it's getting better, a lot better. You know, there's plenty of room for improvement still. But I do think it's much more top of mind. And I think people are really working on it. And I think editors have a lot of influence. Like when, you know, when I get an assignment as a photo editor and I have to think of who the photographer is, you know, well, there's an opportunity, right? For trying to rebalance the scales and getting, you know, much more diversity into whatever your publication happens to be. So I think editors have a really large role to play.
Thinking generally about kind of the role of the image, the role of photography. I mean, how do you characterize or how do you think about the role of photography in storytelling itself? Is it just another medium? Does it have a particular quality to it that distinguishes it from other forms of media? If so, you know,
well,
kind of what makes it distinctive and powerful?
Well, you know, I mean, it's obvious, but, you know, it crosses language barriers, right? So I think it's so, you know, we can speak to one another in images without knowing one another's language, right? It's a universal language. And as, you know, the last 10 years has really shown us how much photography is being used by people to communicate with each other through social media and through so many other venues that we now use, where we speak to each other more in photographs than, you know, writing a letter, you know? So I think that it's incredibly important and useful. And also it's, I mean, what I just love about photography is that a sense of universal language and how it's so much about feeling. It's a felt language as much as intellectual. I mean, it does both. You know, there's information in a photograph, but there's also can be a lot of emotional communication happening as well. So I think that It's so important. And when it's combined, then, all by itself, it's fabulous. Then when it's combined, with words or sound or something, we're just up in the game all the time in terms of how we can communicate with each other. So I just love that about that. I get to see how people see. I get to see what you see and kind of what you think about it.
Yeah.
About what you're seeing. And I think that information, it's transmitted quickly. You can see it right away, but it also, the best photos for me, they kind of gave you that information, but they got a real long tail. Like I can come back to it and get something else and come back to it and, get a little more. And they're not just this kind of a photo, but, I think we're so lucky, to be, aren't we, in this community?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you were going to show us some work, take us through a presentation on some projects and tell us a little bit about the decision making behind them.
Yeah. Okay, now it's on me. We're going to do the technical part of the program here.
Indeed, the share screen thing.
My screen. We practiced this, so hopefully it'll work. It works good.
And just a reminder to everyone while we're getting this set up, you can drop questions into the Q&A box. There are some there. We will get to them. We'll either bring them into the conversation at the right point, or we'll certainly cover them at the end. So feel free to ask. Okay, so we covered a little bit of this already. This is just some of the work of as a photo editor, things that I worked on while I was those 8 years that I was editing for the magazine. And, as we talked about a little bit about diversity, one of my sort of missions that I sort of gave myself as a photo editor was I really wanted to help bring in the next generation of photographers that could be National Geographic photographers. And this whole idea of, editing someone else's work being so much easier than your own. Since leaving the Geographic, I've been working on a lot of editing photo books amongst teaching and mentoring. So far, I've worked on about 7 photo books, two that have not yet started that'll probably start next year. Here are 3 of the published books. One is this Habibi by Antonio Facciolongo, who was the 2020 World Press Book Award winner. Like a Bird by Joanna Maria Fritz, about Islamic circuses, and Underspo, like a personal memoir by Petra Barth. I've been really lucky to be working a lot with publisher Svetlana Bachevanova at Photo Evidence Books. Habibi was one of those books. Upcoming this fall is We Cry in Silence by Shmita Sharma, about trafficking of young girls in India, Bangladesh, and Nepal. The Phoenician Collapse by Diego Ibarra Sanchez, which is at the printers now, and I'm going to talk more about this one later. And our very own Troubled Home, which is being self-published by 7-member Anush Babajanyan, about the lives of Armenians living in Nagorno-Karabakh, designed by the fabulous designer Bonnie Bryant. And sorry, I can't show you the cover yet because it has not yet been released, so just check her website to order and see it. So one thing about editing books versus magazines is, with a magazine, you have a lot less space. You have a defined paper stock, a defined size and shape of the magazine, and often a very more particular type of story with a good amount of text. And books are a little bit like 3D chess. There are so many variables in terms of size and type of paper and bindings and the number of pages, and whether is this kind of a storybook, or is it more of an essay, or is it even more like visual poetry? And it's a bit mind-boggling trying to understand all the options and determining what's best for the work. And I want you to know that I'm very much still learning my way around all of this, and I love the challenge. And a photo book is such a personal object that I feel a big responsibility of the photo editor is to help make the photographers' like dreams and desires come true for their book, and to be their second pair of eyes and an advocate for them every step of the way. So I want to walk you through the editing process for the Phoenician Collapse in more detail.
Diego, I had worked a little bit with editing some things with Diego, and he contacted me in around 2020 and asked if I would help him edit a book about living and working in Lebanon for his past 11 years of his life. And initially he sent me about 900 images, and we ended up having about 1,100 that we worked with. I think because of my work at the National Geographic, I really need to have a strong understanding of the subject matter before I can edit anything. Because for me, it's not just picking the best pictures, because I'm really always looking for this underlying idea of what the story is. So Diego and I had a lot of conversations about his life in Lebanon, the politics and the history of the place, and also his personal story about raising his son in Beirut with his partner, Evelyn. Diego had created a list of chapters he wanted to use for the book. So after I had cut the work down to about 400 images, we were organized into these chapters. And Diego and I had a lot of meetings after I got to about 400, going over the work and deciding what to keep, what to let go, and if I had left out anything that he really wanted to see in the book. So I created this image catalog with a lot of topical folders and many edits. I'm like kind of, a little anally organized about things. And I went from like 1,100 images to 445, and then to 287, and to 236, and finally to 169. And one of our challenges, and Diego won't mind that I mentioned this, is that I would edit it down to like 250, and then he would send me like 30 more photos. And then, and then I would edit it down to 225, and then he would send me like 30 more photos. So we did a little bit of that for a while, until I started like worrying about our deadlines. So the book ended up with about 163 images, plus a lot of miscellaneous documents and illustrations. Diego did amazing research, finding a lot of historical documents and maps and old advertising from the tourist industry. And we tried to also incorporate that into the book. And then we had all his personal family photos of his life there, and also of his son, Hugo.
So just a question, did it also, you would make the edits very thoroughly. I love how this looks with all the different folders. Would he then sometimes, instead of sending new images, also say like, oh, you took that image out, I really want it in? Were there a lot of discussions usually?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Usually, we would be working with this catalog. So we wouldn't really, you can't do that for 1,100 images, right? You would never get anywhere. It would just take to go through every photo. So once I got it down to about like 400-ish, that's when we sort of started to really hunker down and go through, like this or that. But I had things organized. So we had a lot of protests. So we would have a whole folder with protest pictures. And here's the protest pictures I think are going to work the best. Let's go through those. Is there anything left out? Do you want me to bring something back? Can we cut this? Let's cut this more. So we would go sort of by sort of the topics and cut within. I like to edit within that topic. So that's why I've got like a gazillion like kind of folders here, right? So we would edit like, the daily life or the detail photos or the domestic workers or something. And within that, we would cut within each of these like kind of idea topic folders, right? And then that would get us to that 200 or something, which is when I brought it into Keynote. I bring everything into Keynote. And that's where I like to start sequencing and make pairings and triptychs. And really, this is the fun part. Like all the rest of it is like really hard work. And especially for the photographer to let go of these photos that, mean so much to them. And you kind of have to be that reader. Like, when I'm looking at a photo and they're trying to convince me of its value with like paragraphs and paragraphs of words, then I really start to wonder, is this picture going to communicate all that? Is it really going to do the work that we need? When we've got 4 others that are very similar, and we're going to have to make some tough decisions. So that once you get kind of it down and start to sequence and play, it's like fantastic, really fun, so then we start making pairings and triptychs and I go crazy with this stuff. I love making all this stuff. And then he would make some and send to me, and I would make some and send to him. And I just feel like sky's the limit at the beginning. Let's try everything. We're going to edit, but right now we're just going to brainstorm, and kind of, create sequences. And I think a lot about like, what's the experience turning from page to page? What you saw this and now you saw that. And then what did you feel? And is it kind of like a, ooh, are people going like, ooh, when they, kind of that, you want an emotional feeling. And also the work has to, like in many photo books, there's no captions with the photos. I mean, if you look at most photo books, they don't have any captions. The photographers never want captions by their photos, So it's always at the back. They're kind of at the back, or there'll be certain pages that have the words on them, but nobody wants them like right there, right? So, it's gotta speak without words. It's got to really kind of encapsulate. So I try a lot of things, and when I'm making, various groupings and stuff like that. And some of these we didn't use. I'm just showing you sort of the process. We just keep, it's like, sometimes you put two photos together or you do something and it just like snaps. It's just like, it goes, yes, me, I'm the one, and then you go, yeah, you are. These two photos are so happy with each other. So let's keep that, so.
And this is all before how many pages the book would be and so on. You are just like playing, but
we don't know
without any restrictions.
I mean, sometimes I mean, sometimes the publisher, will have a definite, this is 150 pages, so don't make any more than that. So then you're constrained. But I think in this ideation process, you don't really want that leaning on you, because you might, it might constrain you too much, because we can, but at a certain point, it's like, okay, now we have to like, gotta get serious here, So also there's a lot of design ideas that Diego had, a lot of design ideas and really great ones, like he putting these like little paper flaps in the middle of a photo, and he was going to have some text, and we did do this. And we had ideas about making gatefolds, so it would open up a third page. We did that a couple of times. And then, the designer was Enrique Salvo Lizalde, is Spanish, and this university was supporting this book. And one of the first things we would send everything, this massive amount of like ideas and sequences and pairings. We'd send it all to the designer, and that's when we're kind of going, okay, like how many pages can we really have?
Yes.
Now it's a 250-page book, right? It's huge. It's ridiculous. We have to get serious here. So then we're like, and the first thing they always want to do is, what's the cover? Because you use the covers used for promotion if you're going to do a Kickstarter campaign. So cover's like really important. It has a little bit of a marketing job sometimes if it's going to be in a bookstore on a stand or something. So the first option, these are some of the options that Enrique did, and Diego went with that first one because that's a cutout. And there's a picture, it's like a cutout of the country of Lebanon, and then you see through and you see a photo, right?
I see.
So that's how.
And the photo behind it is the photo that's on the second cover.
Yes.
So
that's but that option too, that we didn't do. We only did option one, but yes, that's the photo. That's the photo that you're seeing a glimpse of, and then you turn.
I really like it.
You would see the whole. Yeah, you'd see the whole cover. So we had a lot of, then we started having a lot of Zoom meetings with the designer and the publisher, showing these sequences, and I've made a gazillion PDFs, and every time, all the design ideas and everything, they affect the edit and the sequence. Especially, books are done in signatures. So there's 8 or 16 pages in what's like a little signature. And so you have to when you're adding a fold out or you're adding additional paper or different papers, they have to come at certain places in the book. So that can affect the sequence. So then you have to change the sequence. So this is just a little opening chapter, one of the chapter openings. These are the chapters that he had that we started with. And I'm totally meddlesome. I meddle in everything, you know, I copy edit the text. I like to read everything. I always have a lot of design ideas because I love books, and I got a whole room full of photo books.
Were you, when you were working at Nat Geo, were you also that involved into all these different things, or were those different roles for different people? Like the reading.
You're less involved in the text at the Geographic because they have definite text editors. You get to express an opinion, but it's not like you're not copy editing or doing any of that stuff. You're more involved in the captions for the photos at the Geographic, and that they get them right. And you're definitely part of the layout process for it's like you work very closely with the designer for the layout and the sequence of the stories in the magazine. So this is basically sort of a mock-up of what the book will look like. I think it's just coming off the printers. It'll have a little booklet in the back that has the separate booklet that has all the captions and some of the translations. It'll be in Spanish and English, 500 copies, and distributed by Photo Evidence sometime this fall. And
I love that the back as well. I don't know what's that called.
It's
like
an open binding. The thing about sometimes these open bindings, if you open it, the front cover is kind of loose from the, it'll lay flat. And this allows when you open the pages, not to have like
like
coming in like this, right? Yeah, it's flat. And photographers love that because then it's no gutter, eating up the middle of your photo.
Yeah, it's much nicer. I really love this. So how much time did this take from beginning till end for you? When did you get it?
This one, took a long time. Because we started in, I think we started in late 2020, and it's just being published now.
Okay.
Right. But it was not like the only book I was working on. Right. So I'm going back and forth between different books, and they're in different phases of production. And even, he even photographed a bit more for it while we were, because Lebanon was having, like huge issues, right? I mean, the economy was literally collapsing. And so he was doing some work with the New York Times. And so he got some new images that we added to the book.
Yeah, that must have been quite difficult, because I can imagine there were certain stages where you maybe both thought, okay, it's done now or almost done. And then the news cycle picked up again. Because it was crazy. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes. Because you want it to be as current as possible. So a story like that. Right. Yeah. So we definitely had to we added some really nice, I'm glad we had that opportunity, that we kind of took our time working on it. It was great. I learned a lot doing it.
Yeah. Thanks for showing. It looks amazing. Looking forward to see it in real life.
Too.
You are too. Yeah, I can imagine. So
one of the things ask, because I was curious about like the negotiating process with the photographer and so on, because obviously in a lot of situations when you're collaborating with someone in an organization or whatever, you're trying to find common ground, and that means people compromise. But in a situation like this, it seems to me that compromise might lead to something that's a bit meh, and someone's a little bit happy and a little bit happy, but no one's really happy about it. So when you're negotiating with a photographer, are you looking for compromise, or are you looking for one of you is trying to persuade the other of a particular thing?
Well, I think for the magazine, which is different because we're all working for the magazine.
Yeah.
Right. And their agenda, it's more so like their agenda about this story, so well, the photo editors that, you know, were the advocate for the photographer's voice and their vision for it, right? And getting it right visually. For a photo book, you know, I mean, this is their photographer's baby. I mean, this is like a whole different thing. And I am at the service of that, right? I feel totally at this, you know, what can I do to help us get where you want? So that, you know, well, I will maybe definitely try to convince or persuade about some of the photos, because when we're cutting, you know, I'm thinking, well, we could lose this, and the photographer's thinking, we can't lose that. And I'm like, well, yes, you can. And so, you know, because you got this one, you know, but so it's kind of this dialogue. But, you know, if a photographer, like, you know, they feel super, super strongly about a photo, and maybe I feel less so, well, they win for sure, you know, because they, you know, they've got to be happy. I mean, they must be happy with it. There's no like, I'm happy and they're not. Absolutely not, because it's their book, right? And you know, how many books will you do in your lifetime? You better be like ecstatic, you know. I want you to be ecstatic about it, right?
And did this go through the Visual Thinking Collective? Or is it you personally? How does this work? How can people like, can they ask you to do these kind of things, or does it go?
I mean, yeah, the collective is more like we're like a support system for one another. More so, we do some projects together. Mostly, like we've done some Photoville exhibits, we've done some workshops and stuff like that. But everybody's kind of got their own like business, as it were. Yeah, it's a good way to contact me or one of the others. We had somebody recently who contacted, like a photographer I don't know, who contacted and was looking for somebody to work on a book, and with them, and I couldn't do it. I'm too busy, but somebody else is going to do it from the collective. So Lauren Steele will do it. So that's great. So it's a good place to come in and, you know, just check out our bios and see who you might want, or you can just send a group email or somebody directly as well. But yeah.
And let's ask one of the questions that's in the Q&A, which is kind of a business type question. Joan's asking, who pays you to edit? Does the photographer pay? Does the publisher pay? Does that vary? What's the approach?
It varies somewhat. When I'm working for photo evidence, they pay me. But in most and in some cases, if it's going to be a self-published book, the photographer will pay. I myself, I work sort of on a flat fee, because if I, you know, did it by the hour, it would be ridiculous amount of money, because I put in a ton of time, but I want to, you know, it's how I work, and I love it, you know, and I want to, and I need the time to like really understand the work, and like I like to, you know, for me, I could like never stop editing, you know. I really need a deadline, because I always like, it's hard to even look back, because, I think, like, well, why did I do that? And, you know, that should be here and not there. And, you know, it can drive yourself crazy. So, you know, but I like to have the time to get away from it and come back to it, because I will have fresh eyes and ideas. So, but yeah, mostly it's like, most publishers, not all, like if you're Salgado, you probably don't have to raise money to publish your book, but, you know, God bless that, you know. But I think a lot of photographers, a lot of publishing companies, they have really narrow profit margins, and you have to raise some money for your book to publish your photo book and bring that to the table. So that's why a lot of photographers, you know, do Kickstarter campaigns. Like Diego did a Kickstarter campaign, Anush did one. I think Smita did one. All of them did Kickstarter campaigns to raise some of the money. Well, often the publisher is the person who, you know, they put their publishing stamp on it, and they'll distribute, and they'll send it out, and they'll run the buying of the book on their websites and stuff like that. But I mean, it's not like you're going to make a ton of money on making a photo book. And most of the print runs, like Diego's, is 500 copies. You know, they're not big print runs. You know, some photo books go on to sell tons and tons and get reprinted, and they're on their third and fourth and, you know, editions. So yeah, but I think it's I mean, but everybody I don't know a single photographer that doesn't want a photo book. I meet photographers that have been shooting for 6 months and they say they want to do a book. It's like, okay, great. Let's work toward that, right?
Yeah. It's so true. You teach a lot, I know. I teach too, and sometimes you're teaching for like 3 weeks and it's the start of their first project, and they're at the end of the 3 weeks, they want to publish a book.
It's a book. It's always a book, right? And these days you could do a blurb book if you wanted to, without huge cost, right? So yeah, there's a lot more accessibility too.
Yeah, that's true. Let me check some of the other questions. There are quite a lot. Let's see. Oh yeah, Carrie is asking, I would love to hear Sarah's advice for someone who wants to break into photo editing mid-career. I'm coming from a creative tech background. Yeah.
Well, I think that that's a workshop I want to have. I teach workshops on photographers on how to edit their own work, but I think I'd like to come up with one where I teach people who want to be photo editors. That'd be a totally interesting workshop. But I think mostly, hopefully, Carrie, if you have friends that are photographers, right? And I would say start by editing with them. They all need help, whether they know it or not. So it's like, I think, if you could start with editing other people's work, like if you have photographers who are friends, just start out by volunteering to help them and start, learning how to work with a photographer, which is super important. And what's the goal? What are we working toward? Are we making a magazine? Are we just doing a portfolio? Is this an edit for a contest? There's all kinds of end products besides books. I mean, I help photographers with all of those things. Build their portfolio, they want to enter some contest and they need a 30 photo edit, I'm not only just doing photo books. So I think that's a good way to start, and then see how you feel about it. Like, is this right for you? And maybe you can help them get it published somewhere. Maybe you can help them about pitching this work. Like sometimes, how to help them make a pitch. I do that too. I help photographers sometimes organize the work and make a pitch to somebody, how to, present the work in such a way that somebody might be interested in actually either publishing it or helping you continue the work. Sometimes that's what you want. You're not ready to publish. So I think you have to start by working with photographers and editing their work. There's jobs out there too. I mean, I see lots of jobs coming up more than say 5 or 6 years ago for photo editors. I think it's becoming more of people understand it's a real job and a real role. And I think that you'd need some experience probably to get those jobs, but which is why, if you can start editing with other photographers, and then on your website, you can show edits that you've done with different photographers.
I think that's some solid advice. Also, there's not really, as far as I know, there's no school for editing, right? Or is there? Am I missing?
There's some schools in the United States, like Rhode Island School of Design, RISD, and they have some photo editing classes. So does Ohio University of Missouri Journalism School. It's like they have some classes that are about photo editing. So I think it's happening more. And I'm sure that there's probably other schools out there that I don't know about that are also having some. I think it's become more, like I say, it's become like a real career path. Yeah.
But there's also definitely room, I think, for you to start your own. Exactly. It would be fun.
It would be fun.
There is a need for it. And you just mentioned pitching. I know your current role is not, a photo editor in that sense anymore, that you are looking through pitches. But I would really love to hear some advice. I know a lot of the people that are usually watching would really love some advice on pitching. Would you be able to share some of your thoughts on that?
Sure, absolutely. I think so. So if so the easiest pitching is to somebody you already know, like a photographer, like a photo editor at a publication. They know you and they know your work. And I think then it could be just in an email, You know, like you could say, I've either started working on, or I'm thinking about working on XYZ. Here's how I see it. Here's why it's, you know, answering the questions of like, so what is the story? Why now? Why should we do this now as opposed to like last year or next year? Especially if it's an editorial publication. You know, what's it going to take to do it? Like I need, I've already put in 3 weeks, and I'm probably going to go out and do a couple more weeks. You know, the idea of, do you have ideas for text? Are you going to do video? You know, things like that. And, you know, what's going to cost you to do, if you're looking for continued support, you know, and I think with somebody you know, you can do all that. You can say all that. And you might not even have to show them any photos because they know you already and what you can do. Now, if it's somebody you don't know, you know, and they don't know you and they don't know your work, then I think it's real different because they might not even look at your email, you know, right away because they don't know who you are and they're getting bombarded with them. And they should look at your email, and a lot of photo editors really try to, but you know, they are being bombarded. So I would say in the email, you want to have, hi, here's who I am, you know, blah, blah, blah. Introduce yourself. I'm a student, I'm a professional. I've worked for some of these other places. I've been, and I think if you've already started on it, that's even way better than just an idea if you're an unknown to them. So I've been working for the last 2 months on this story about XYZ. And it's really, really important because, and it's really relevant to your publication because, and make sure they didn't just do it last week because that doesn't look good at all.
Yeah.
Like, you know, then it's like, well, why aren't you looking at our magazine if you want to be in our magazine? You know, we just did that story. You know, so that's really, really important. Never promise you can do something unless you can really do it, like you have access. You know, you know, if it's something like I'm going to I want to do gold mining in Peru. Well, can you get in? You know, don't like pitch it unless you think you've got good contacts on the ground and good local collaborators and you can get in. I think that's really important. And then I would add a PDF. So you want to get that in the email, not too long, but then I would add a PDF showing some of the work you've already done. If you have a title, that's great because that kind of really focuses it. And it could just be 10 photos. It could be 15 photos. It could be 25 photos. It really depends. And then at the end of that, you want a little like bio and contact information because PDFs, once they leave that email, they can get lost, right? Yeah. And then it's like, well, who sent me? I literally have had PDFs and I can't remember who sent it, you know, because it's not, no. And in the subject line, you know, it could be Peru mining, you know, David Campbell, and then the date. So we got all the right there. You know, I know who it came from. And then how can I get a hold of you at the end? You know, your website, your email, a phone number, your location, you know. Also, I think when you're pitching to someone you maybe don't know, I think it's really helpful. And we all think about this a lot more like, well, why you? Why should you do this story? What if you've got some skin in the game in a particular way? Like I speak the language. I've been there 20 times. I lived there. You know, something. Because if it's just like rando, you know, I live in California, but I want to do a story in Tibet and I've never been there and I don't know anything about it. I don't know. I don't think so. You know, it's kind of like, why you? You know, so what's special? Like, how is this special for you? And what's your relationship to the story?
Yeah, that's good. We've got a couple of questions.
Helpful.
Yeah, we've got a couple. We got a lot of questions, but we've got a couple of questions on captions. So I'm going to put these together. One's from Jim, one's from Nipa, because they're both asking similar sorts of things. Because when you were going through the book, you talked about the way in which the captions were at the back and so on. And they're both asking, well, in the National Geographic magazine, or to avoid misinterpretation, photos often need captions. So why would you put the caption at the back, not with the photo? What's the justification and the rationale behind those decisions?
Well, the magazine for sure, the captions are going to be right there. And magazines in general, the captions are generally right there or on the following page with a, previous page signifier. Yeah. So magazines, you're always going to have them, but a book is like a totally different thing. A book is like, well, I don't really mind having a caption with the photo in general, but it's also a bit of an art object, right? And I think photographers feel very differently about them. They're not that magazine story. They're something else altogether. Even though there's an underlying story perhaps to this, it's much more of an experience than education in a way. It can be educational, but photographers, and mostly this is the photographers. Like I would never force somebody to put captions, with their photos. I have so many photo books and they're all at the back. They're all pretty much at the back. And there's many ways to do them at the back so that's not a big pain where you've got to keep going back and forth. I've done books where we'd have a little thumbnail photo at the back and then the caption. So it's really easy, and which is, I kind of like that, because then it's really easy for me to read the caption for that photo. And it's really a lot about aesthetics in a photo book. It's an aesthetic choice. Sometimes, maybe all you could, it depends on the book though, you might have the way the book is designed or something like a photo here and then a blank page here. And then you have a little chunk of text, that explains it. Maybe you want that for every photo. Maybe you just want that with some of the photos. These are why it's 3D chess, right? Because there are so many options on how to do it. And there's no one way, you got to find that way for this particular work. And I've the book I'm kind of working on that maybe will be kind of on hold for a little bit. The photographer got COVID, but I think that location and date would be helpful on each of the photos for this particular book. I don't know if the photographer is going to agree, but I think that could be, because it is a bit of a timeline-ish kind of book. Mm-hmm. So maybe that would be helpful, but we'll see.
I suppose a lot of these things are determined by the purpose of the book, really, aren't they?
That's true.
Exactly what you're trying to communicate. Because if it is purely an art object, then these are questions that can be handled aesthetically. But if it's a book that's actually trying to communicate something either for an advocacy campaign or some other thing, then different criteria are going to come into play.
That's very true. And that's absolutely true. It's also, what is the purpose of this book?
Yeah.
I think most of the photographers I'm working with are photojournalists, but they still want an art object.
Yeah.
So it's like finding that, the crisscross place.
Yeah.
So it's going to communicate. And it's that intersection of art and journalism. Can we make that work? That's kind of the sweet spot.
Yeah.
I think.
And I guess the answer to that is yes, you can make it work, but it takes a lot of work.
Yes. True.
Do we have time for?
We have lots of time for questions. Do you want to work through some of them, Ilvy?
Yes, let me see. No, maybe you have one. I'm reading through.
Well, let me ask one.
Oh, there we go. Okay,
I'll ask this one from Guillaume. This might apply more to maggazine experience than book experience, but you never know. Have you edited a project you didn't feel compelled about, not because of the quality of the images, but you didn't have interest in the subject? And if so, how did you find a way to work through it? And what did you learn in the process of doing that?
Good question. The stories that I kind of would like to, kind of not be in my office when they came around to hand out the stories, it was mostly it's the science stories, right? Mm-hmm. They're really hard. And I just felt like, oh my God, I would have to go back to college, but I had a few. I had one that was like an archaeology story, and I had I just thought, well, I didn't get to say, I couldn't say no to it. I had, it was being assigned to me. But what I found was, and you just dive into the research. right? You just start educating yourself and dive into the research, and almost anything starts to get really interesting, right? You know, I mean, all of that, and I got really into this. You know, I was on the phone talking to paleobotanists. You know, like, well, what did they eat and what did they grow? And, you know, are any of those seeds still exist? Because I was thinking, oh, we'll take the artifacts and we'll put them with the seeds, you know, we'll photograph it like that. But I need to know which seeds and the right seeds. And then I had to get the seeds. And then I had to, you know, and it was with the Smithsonian, they had the artifacts and we had to freeze them for 2 months to make sure there's no little bugs got into the Smithsonian. So it was like fascinating, you know, and for me, that's the door always, is the research, you know, that's how I get interested, because, well, I'm just curious and love to learn things. And one of my one of the favorite ones I ever edited was a story about vanishing languages with Lynn Johnson, who's like, you know, my hero. She's an incredible photographer and a real thinker too. So, and it was about vanishing languages. And I'm like, vanishing languages, you know, it's language. You know, how do you photograph language? It's like, what are we going to do? You know, so, but then it was the same thing. It was like digging into the research, and we had a linguist, the linguist had proposed it, was going to write it. And I read his book, and, you know, as I'm reading his book, and one of his locations was in Siberia, and, you know, they had like really detailed language about their yaks. You know, their yaks was like, one of, you know, so whatever's important in the culture gets a lot of attention, and it gets a lot of language, right? So, you know, a little white 6-month-old yak with like black spots, there's a whole word for that, you know, a whole phrase that is all that's different than the year-old one with brown spots, right? You know, so it's like very particular language. And I thought, oh, okay, we can photograph that.
Yeah.
This is what we can photograph the culture that's embedded in the language, you know. So then we came up with like ways to do photographs that kind of illustrated the language, you know, that these phrases and words, and we had word lists, and we worked with all these linguists, and Lynn was just a champion, and it's just beautiful. And I'm so proud of that story to this day. It's really cool.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's fun.
There's a question from Angela that I really like, very curious about it myself as well. Is there some go-to strategy that you use to start a story in a photo book? What is the best way to start a story? I mean, it's always different, but...
You mean to start the book?
No, like which kind of, the way I kind of understand the question is to start the story. So not the making of the book, but when you're storytelling, is there kind of like a go-to way? Do you dive in? Will the first picture tell the story? Or is it like a slow start better? Or
what sort of picture do you start with? I think that's
exactly. Yeah.
Gosh, that's you know, there's really no exact answer, right? Sometimes, you know, the photographer has a real idea. I mean, some photographers that I've worked with, like Diego was one who had real ideas about it, the kind of book he wanted and what he wanted and how he wanted to do it. But I think that some don't, you know, like I'm dying to, come on, tell me, you know, and they're like, no, I like, you know, show them, oh, I like that. Like, well, yeah, but don't you like something else too? You know, so it's kind of like, you know, they don't know. You know, so then you kind of, it's on you to just present, you know, then I present ideas and see what, like, the light comes on, you know, and they're like excited about it. But gosh, there's like, it's like snowflakes. There's millions of ways you could start any book. And it's really, I think, knowing what is this book about, you know, what gives you joy when you look at it. Like, I know, oh, I love that picture. And I love it to be like, we could start here, you know, and then that sets the tone, right, for what comes next and next and next, and then how it goes, you know, like, what are those pictures that, you know, do you want right out front? Because I think, you know, the beginning is so important to really grab people, you know, and really kind of engage them, you know, those first, even though many of us look at books from the back, you know, how you start a book. And you look
Yeah.
You know, we're so worried about the beginning, but then we flip through from the back. You know, what's that, right? So the back's important too. So
Yes.
Or randomly at any point in the middle, you know.
Yeah.
Or yeah,
Open it
so
up.
it's like that's the thing about a book. It's
Yeah.
not like a magazine where, I mean, you might kind of flip through it, but you know, there's a text that,
Mhm.
you know, if you're going to read the text, you know, you're going to start at the beginning. And with a book, you can almost start anywhere. So, but I still, you know, when I'm editing and stuff, I'm thinking about what's that mood and what's the mood we want to create at the beginning of the book, you know. Is it somber? Is it joyful? Is it a tragedy? You know, where's the best place? And often, you know, I kind of, you know, start with a few photos that are not attached to anything in particular. You know, they're just setting a mood, you know, for the book. But yeah, it's a really good question because it's hard to figure out sometimes where to start. You know, you might have to try a number of things till you find what's really working, because it's not just that picture, it's linked to all the rest of the photos. It's that one, and then you turn, and then what? That second picture is just as important because it's going to be a surprise. It's going to be the next step in the story.
True.
I also think it's a little bit like writing in some way, because if you're a writer, usually you don't start with the introduction, or you don't start with the first page. The introduction is usually one of the last things you come to write in a text. You'll begin the text somewhere, but it's very rare that is actually the beginning of the text by the time you've finished. So, and that because you don't know where the text is going, and when you know where the text is going, then you know where you want to start. So it looks like the beginning to someone, but in the process, it might be produced at the end.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's also like, and I'm glad you mentioned about text, because, you know, first sentences in a book is what we're kind of talking about. What's that first sentence? And there are some amazing first sentences, you know, that kind of are intriguing, and, you know, they're kind of out there. And I think 100 Years of Solitude has a great first sentence about, you know, I can't remember the colonel's name, but he's it says something about, you know, Jose Buendia, when he was standing in front of the firing squad, started to think about when his father showed him ice.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Is that great?
Yeah.
Exactly. And it immediately does something to your thinking, right?
Yeah.
That's what pictures should do as well.
Can you do that with a photo?
Yeah.
And it references one of our main characters. We have a sense of place, some drama. He's standing in front of the firing squad. How did he get there? And then the ice, you know? So it's like, can we do that with a photo?
Yeah.
That'd be pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
So there are quite a few more questions, but one that I liked, it's a bit, okay, we'll see. So it's from an anonymous attendee asking, I always struggle with writing bio and artist CV when applying for grants, as I'm not really an accomplished photographer. What do I write? What is your recommendation, and any resources to look into? Well, what's your recommendation? Let's say that.
Well, your bio is kind of, you know, your bio. It's going to be who you are and what you've done, and good information about yourself. You know, your bio can also include, like, you know, that you rafted the Danube River. I mean, it can be, you know, it can be more than just photo stuff, because you want people to get to know you as a person, you know, that you have 6 cats or what. I think I find that kind of stuff sort of interesting. You know, you're a master chef on the side, who knows, like whatever, but something there's all the photo information and what you've done or where you've published, or if you've had a gallery show, or, you know, your travels, where have you been, you know. And I think so the bio is like kind of facts. It's the facts, you know, the quote unquote artist statement. That's not done quite as much in journalism. You know, in journalism and photojournalism, we don't really do artist statements. We tell what the story is or the project is. We explain that. But, you know, artist statements for somebody who's a bit more tilting into the gallery and fine art world it's also a description of often the project or the things that the kind of art you're doing, the kind of work you're doing, and what it means kind of and they're often more academic. Artist statements are a little more academic. It's probably good to like go to people's websites and see what they've written, you know, in terms of their bios. And if there's an artist statements, I see artist statements when I'm judging, like, you know, for grants. And I see sometimes there's artist statements. One, I judged this past year, this Me and Eve grant, which is done by the center in Santa Fe. And that it's all for women over the age of 40. And the grant that was selected, the project that was selected, was a really personal artist statement about the work and and losing her mother and coping with some depression and everything like that. And it was very effective. Very, you know, I think I like to say to photographers sometimes, you know, make it personal. The personal can become the universal. And I love the personal.
That's
beautiful. For me.
I was actually this week thinking of changing my bio a bit, let's say updating it. And I'll keep this in mind because mine is not personal at all, because I always felt when I started out, actually when I made the bio a couple of years ago, that people might not want to read that or they might find it unprofessional, even though for myself, I wanted to add things like kind of where I grew up, and that also shaped the way why I started photography, and I never added it. But now hearing you say it, it inspires me to change my bio a bit and make it a bit more personal as well.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. What do you say, David? I mean, I like the personal information.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you know, it's a form of storytelling itself, your bio.
That's right.
So you want to have something that's going to catch attention at the
Absolutely,
beginning.
that's right.
So,
that's
you know,
good point.
None of us wants to hear every single detail of every class you did in high school, but
that's true.
You know, you want something distinctive, you want something interesting, something that shows your personality a little bit, and then conveys the information.
Because sometimes, you know, people like to pack it with every publication they've ever published and every gallery they've done, and it becomes like a chunky paragraph. And, you know, you just kind of, you know, I might just go, okay, so they've published a lot of places. I don't need to read every single one, you know, but they've had a lot of gallery shows, you know, but it's the other information, like we're talking about, the more personal, that I'll read, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Nice. When you described working with Diego, you talked about having like 400 photographs to begin with and cutting down to 260 or whatever. Jeffrey's got a question about the number of photographs that a photographer needs to consider in order to even think about publishing a book. I'm sure there's not a formula for this, but what would you say about kind of the body of work you need and what you need to get it down to be manageable for a book project?
So it's also very, you know, kind of, there's so many possibilities here, because, you know, you could go out on something and not have spent a lot of time, and it has a great amount of depth, and you could do like a little book, right? You know, on something like that. This is 11 years of work. This is that book was like 11 years of work. So there was a lot, you know, he had a lot to go that he wanted to go through. And for me, having worked at the Geographic, you know, because we would receive every photo the photographer took, you know, and we would go through all of them, you know, so I could be starting in mostly be starting in the thousands, you know. I think Robin Hammond did a story that I worked on with him, and it was like 40,000 photos, you know, and you're going to go through all of them. So, you know, I'm not really afraid of 1,000. It's like, I can look at 1,000. That's okay. Bring them on. Show them to me. You know, it's like, for me, it's like, I like a lot because I'm really trying to get to know the photographer, how they see, what interests them, what they're drawn to. So, you know, sometimes, and also I don't trust them. so much for their own editing. So if they're only going to send me like 200, I'm thinking, well, what else is there?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
what am I not seeing? You know, maybe
Yeah.
there's some good stuff hidden in there. So I like to get a lot, but I would not say that that's what I don't know about a lot of other photo editors. They probably, depending, you know, the size of the book is also going to determine the number of pages, how many photos. But, you know, I think if you have a solid project, you know, 500 photos could be, you know, I think it's really probably the editor and the publisher, what they are like to get. But, you know, I always ask for more. And I do that. You know, if somebody sends me 200 photos, I can say, no, what else? You send me some more, you know, send me another 200.
Yeah.
What would that look
like? Probably not 40,000, because then you become a contest. Become a contest jury at that point.
Absolutely. No, then their head is going to, because that's, you don't want everything, because there's a lot of, you know, people think, oh, there's 40,000 photographs. Well, not actually. There's still only about 1,000 photographs. There's a whole lot of pictures on the way to that photo, you know, like note taking. You know, it's that discovery process. But what I always liked about looking at everything was you really understand how the photographer works.
Yeah.
Right. You really see how they move their body, when they stop and stay, when they got uninterested and left, maybe you think it's too soon. So in terms of the feedback you can give the photographer, it can be really granular, you know, like, you should have stayed a little longer. Or why did you stay so long? You know, you can have interesting conversations.
Yeah. What about, there's a question from Joanne. What about advice on the right book publisher to work with if you're not going to do a self-published book? Do you offer that sort of advice, and what sort of things do you think photographers should think about when they're thinking about a commercial publisher or one of the art house publishers to approach?
Well, I think that the thing is doing the research on the publishers, right? Like, what kind of books are they publishing? Like, are they is the kind of book or topic or something that you want to work on, are they doing those kind of books, right? You want it to fit in with their sort of their book philosophy, their book list, right? Where the smaller publishers, you know, also it's the same. It's like but they might have a wide, you know, like if you're doing a book about kittens, you know, well, you probably don't go to MacBooks unless it's amazing, incredible kittens like we've never seen them before, right? And I shouldn't say that, because of course, you know, 2 months from now, the MacBooks will come out with some incredible kitten, right? So but it's like, you got to do your research, and there's some Lens Scratch, Aileen Smithson, she has a whole little section on her website where she interviews different publishers, book publishers. And I love that. You go there, it's an interview about them. They talk about what their, you know, what kind of books they're doing, their process for obtaining books, whether they take pitches or not. And it's really, really a wonderful resource. And there's some other, you know, that is the one I found that I thought was like really great. But it's small publishers too. It's not, you know, Taschen, but it's, and some of the bigger publishers though, they may have something on their website that says how to pitch to them. What are they looking for? You know, so they'll have submissions, like a submissions policy and a submission, so you can go to their websites. But I think you have to, like everything, you know, you have to do your research and study these publishers and publishing houses and see who's right for you. The other thing is, I think it's sort of like there's certain portfolio reviews that have book publishers come, you know, to them, like the Center in Santa Fe, which they also have gallerists and museums and stuff. It's a little different than say, you know, New York Times portfolio review, which is more the photojournalism world and photojournalism editors. But yeah, the Center and also Photo Lucida, they have some really good, they get book publishers. Also Houston Photo Fest. I mean, these are all US. But there's also, the other thing is there's like the Frankfurt Book Fair. You know, the Frankfurt, that's a huge book fair. And you can bring your ideas and go to those booths. And a lot of them will take a look at your ideas. Sometimes they'll have particular hours at book fairs for certain publishers, because, you know, they're all looking for their next books.
Yeah.
You know, so it's fine to approach them. And there's a little period of time where when I was doing I wanted to pitch book ideas, not of my own photography, because I love vintage photography and you know, sort of vernacular photography. So I had a bunch of ideas for these books, and I worked on making little mock-ups. And I went to the Chicago Book Fair and like was schlepping around some of my book ideas, right? And I didn't know anything, but I didn't know what I was doing at all. But I thought, well, I'm just go. And I found out a lot about what I was doing right and wrong by doing that, you know. So I think that yeah, you just need to do your research, and then I think these book fairs are also good.
Yeah,
good to
I really think
them.
I really think with those portfolio reviews and book fairs, the nice thing is as well that you see people face to face, and that you kind of can feel, is this a connection? Is this a person I would, or a company I would want to work with? Or so yeah, I think it's really a good way. Yeah,
I think so too. Yeah, the face-to-face connection is can be really important. Somebody may just love what you're doing. It might not be exactly right for them, but they're gonna give you a lot of good advice, or maybe point you to who you should go see. You know, so I think that's a really good idea.
Well, I think we're coming towards the end of our time, but we'll squeeze in.
Last question.
Squeeze in the last question for you, Sarah, which is a really good question to finish on, actually, from Angela, if I pronounce that correctly. Which kind of stories are the hardest for you to edit, and what are the ones that you feel that you edit with ease? Are there types of stories that are more difficult by the nature of them, and are there ones that are easier to do?
I think for me, because of my background and experience, the ones that are have kind of more of a definite story to them, you know, as opposed to pure poetry. You know, I love those books. I have bunches of them that are like pure poetry, because, you know, then they could go anyway. I mean, there's less of an underlying story, right? Or it's such a broad idea, right? And I find that, you know, a little harder, because there's just so many ways it could be, you know, and then I get lost in, you know, like all the options, you know, a little bit, and it's harder for me. You really got to be so in touch with how you're feeling when you're trying to do a book that's really just about, well, this looks good with that, and that's all that needs to happen, right? There's not necessarily an underlying story. So the ones that have a little bit more of a story, they at least give me a little structure to start with. Like, you know, and I find that a little bit easier. I think that's my magazine background, you know. So those ones that are more challenging, the ones that I would call like, you know, more tone poems or something, you know, I want to get better at that, because I love those kind of books, you know, and I'm drawn to those books. And that's where like my own growth needs to happen, you know, is by like kind of looking at them like less, not literally so much, because I like to put things together that are not literal, but it's like, I don't have that story structure, you know, because then sky's the limit, you know, so, and I can just a lot of time with that, right? So, but yeah, for me, I think that's kind of one of my own challenges that I need to work on.
Great. Well, it's been absolutely fantastic having you. You've given lots of practical advice, and you've really also extended our editing discussion into the book world, which I think is really significant for everyone. So we really appreciate it, Sarah. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone in the audience for attending, and we hope everyone has a good summer. We've got a couple more events coming up in the next 2 weeks. Then we're taking a little summer interlude. We will have some new articles on the website while that takes place, and then we'll be back with more stuff in September. But watch out for the next couple of weeks too. But Sarah, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Ilvy and David, for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.